all-knowing and all-powerful, starting with the elderly wolf uncle. Chapter 73. The already cracked road. Under this bombardment, I am afraid that it will directly be beyond recognition. At this time, the military helicopter, which had just been hovering at high altitude, rotated its propellers and slowly walked towards Tony. Stark approached. On the helicopter, General Ross, dressed in military uniform, looked at the missiles that covered the two big guys at the same time, and suddenly felt a little anxious. Tony, Stark, don't hit that green guy, that's your own people, he shouted anxiously. Tony, Stark heard this, and looked at the gradually dispersing explosive fire on the ground, and the billowing smoke in its place. You didn't say it earlier. I'm afraid both of them are already slag now. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, his face was strange, and he raised his head and said to General Ross. And yet it was on Tony. The moment Stark looked up. Rumble, the ground below suddenly trembled, emitting a roar. A behemoth figure actually directly tore through the thick black smokescreen, wrapped in strong air currents, and rushed towards Iron Man. The figure had lizard-like grey skin, hideous and terrifying muscles, and every corner of his body was covered with dense bone spurs. Its abomination. After being bombarded by heavy missiles, it was unharmed, and even jumped directly towards Tony. Stark strikes back. Tony, Stark. Abomination may seem hideous now, but it has not lost all its sanity. Its mammoth leaped up, towards Tony. As Stark kept approaching, he also roared out the other party's name. Next second, rumble, his huge body rose rapidly, wrapped in extremely strong air currents, and was already like a cannonball, slamming into the latter. The terrifying impact even directly turned Tony. Stark flung out, "Damn it, Tony." Stark frowned and cursed secretly. Although separated by a layer of steel battlesuit, he can still feel the terrifying impact on his body. Wrapped in Iron Man's suit, he suddenly turned into a golden and red afterimage, and flew backwards all the way. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Suddenly, the sound of collision is endless, and the ground shakes one after another. But it was Iron Man who flew upside down and crashed through several buildings in an uncontrolled row. Every building was left with a big hole filled with dust and mist, and it was full of cracks. And Tony, when Stark smashed into the building not far from Xianxia, he was able to stop the figure that was knocked into the surrounding smoke and dust. Tony, when Stark stood up again in his steel suit, the place where his chest was hit by the abomination was already slightly deformed and distorted. Even the surface of the steel suit has many places, because of the successive collisions just now, and many places have been rubbed off the paint. Looks quite embarrassing. Even if there is anti-Hulk armor in the back, Iron Man can't help the Hulk, let alone now. If you just let him face it, it's probably a little difficult to have the same hatred as the Hulk at this stage. Chen Tian shook his head again and again when he saw this scene, and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Then, his eyes lit up, and he raised his steps and walked towards the place where the fire was shining in the distance and the fog was billowing thickly. Leave it to me. Chen Tian looked at the two behemoth voices, and his eyes shone slightly. Chapter 66. Infinite Superpowers. Two big guys who failed miserably. Boom. The night is getting darker, but New York is silent at this time. The abomination that jumped into the air before, after crashing into Iron Man, landed hard again. More than several tons of lowheads smashed to the ground, directly smashing the ground that was already full of cracks, and then deeply smashed out a big pit. The ground shook violently, thick smoke and dust billowed up, the surrounding fire burst out, and countless distorted lights and shadows swayed on the ground. Hulk. As soon as the abomination fell, he suddenly straightened up and roared at the Hulk. In the endless fire and dust curtain in front of him, the rolling sound wave tore open a hole, his eyes suddenly locked on the Hulk. And all the bone spikes on his body became sharper and sharper at this moment. Both of them are products made by human gamma rays, both are genetically mutated monsters, and they are old enemies in fate. Roar. The Hulk is several meters tall, under the green skin, there are exaggerated muscles like rocks, and the whole body fights, and a terrifying sense of oppression emanates. After continuous fighting, the anger and fighting intent in his heart became more and more vigorous, his strength became stronger and stronger, and his reason gradually decreased at this time. He just wants to fight. Knock knock, rumble. After receiving the other party's provocation, the Hulk directly took a big step and stepped on the ground trembling. Then suddenly exerted his strength, and the whole person turned into a huge green afterimage, heading towards the abomination. Boom. One by one, the huge bodies of the two sides collided violently again. The terrifying wind suddenly spread out from where they collided, blowing up countless gravel smoke. The ground was even more overwhelmed, crawling out more dense cracks. This is a clash of two ferocious beasts in the world. The other side, with the Hulk and abomination, separated by several buildings that were shot through the big hole. Half of the building collapsed in rubble ruins. Rumble. A golden red steel arm, whose surface coating had been scraped off, protruded from the pile of rubble. 290, followed by that hand and pressed it on the pile. Tony Stark suddenly climbed out of it. On the mask of the steel suit, the two eyes emitted white light, and in the dust in front of them, two pillars of light shone out. Damn it, these two big guys are actually so tricky. Tony Stark cursed. Even through the mask, he could feel the gloom of his mood at the moment. Just as he stood up and prepared to move on to Hulk and abomination of those two big guys. Tony Stark suddenly found that the eastern face that he had seen once at the dinner party before was still walking towards the place where the Hulk and the two sides were fighting. Hey, your name is Chen, right? He immediately shouted in the direction where Chen Tian was, and the mask amplified his voice while rendering it a layer of mechanical sound texture. I don't know what you think now, but the place in front is very dangerous. For the sake of your little life, you better get out of here quickly. In any case, Wilson, who is not in disguise, has a long-standing relationship with the Stark group. And Chen Tian is also the other party's partner. So, Tony. Stark made his own reminder for the second time. However, Chen Tian was Tony. Stark prompted one after another, ignoring and unmoved. Still keeping his pace, he walked in the direction of Hulk and Abomination. As for Logan behind him, he took a cart of people to replace that would not be affected for the time being, looking at Chen Tian's back from a distance. Then, the high-altitude military helicopter also lowered altitude and approached Tony Stark. General Ross was on the plane and also noticed this guy who was advancing alone when everyone else was fleeing for their lives. Who is this guy? He couldn't help but ask his subordinates beside him. And hearing his question, everyone on the helicopter looked at Chen Tian and was speechless. Apparently no one knew each other. Meanwhile, SHIELD headquarters. Chapter 1 Previous chapter.